Reardon here. This video will serve to give you a one possible approach to the second essay prompt for the Chapter 5 synthesis unit on education. A reminder that you have the right to make whatever decisions you'd like to make about your essay. I am not going to require that you follow this structure. This is just one possibility that you might use. Now, I really want this essay to be an opportunity for you to practice the creative thinking and the organization of ideas that you'll have to engage in when you do synthesis writing across the disciplines in college. And also, I imagine that especially if you're watching this in class, you have finished your education unit essay thinking sheet, right? You probably have already uploaded a draft of that. You've had a chance to talk to someone else or an entire table group about that. So at this point, you'll be revising that, right? If you like some of the ideas that I'm presenting in this video, and you want to make some modifications to make your structure be more like mine, I totally don't mind if you do that. And you can make those revisions in your thinking sheet and then use your thinking sheet as the skeleton that then helps you to build your essay. If you want to also write a separate outline for your own essay, of course, you can do that as well, but I will not be collecting that or checking that. So let's go ahead and jump in here. Of course, you're going to start with a hook. This is a synthesis essay, so this model will absolutely follow the structure that we've been talking about with just a few modifications. So a hook. You should tell a story. You should tell a story related to your own experience of applying to colleges, especially if you're a senior right now. Or if you're not a senior, you might know someone who has applied to college, a friend or a sibling. If you know someone, a friend or sibling who's in college and is having a certain kind of experience, maybe they're getting a liberal education, maybe they're getting a more technical education, maybe it's a blend. You could tell their story and what kind of experience they're having, positive or negative, and then tie that into your own argument. You'll then need to flow into exigence. And for the exigence for this argument is really the idea in the prompt, right? There exists a tension between our society's move toward more technical education and in particular our sort of America's historical distinctive cultural emphasis on the well-rounded education we call liberal arts. And so I do think it's really important that you bring in the definition of a liberal education that we talked about in class, and that I made sure every fishbowl number 2 talked about, at least indirectly. And that was just these 3 pieces, right? And a liberal education is not focused on a job or career. It allows for exploration of many fields, academic fields or vocational fields, but generally more academic. And then the liberal education allows for, or should allow for, the facilitation of self-reflection and self-discovery in many different ways for students. And then your possible thesis statement. So while a purely technical or vocational education has its merits and is appropriate for some people, college-bound students in America would benefit most from educational opportunities that blend the exploratory nature of liberal arts education and preparation for one's future career. This is a closed thesis statement, by the way, but there are still some connections to the body paragraphs. So I'm sorry, I should say that again. This is an open thesis statement. But there are still some connections to the body paragraphs, and you'll be able to see those when we look at the body paragraph breakdown on the next page here. So here we go. Introduction, using the materials that were on that previous page. First evidence unit. So I think your first paragraph could be just one evidence unit where you present the reality of what our society is doing, right? Our society, American society, is moving toward more technical education and more vocational training. in general. And you can find some evidence of that in Defense of a Liberal Education by Fareed Zakaria in the textbook. So you might even talk about why this kind of training might be appropriate for some people and acknowledge and refute that potential counterargument right away. There are some groups of people who just maybe affording college is just not a possibility. Maybe they are simply not interested in an academic pursuit. Maybe, their parents own a business they're going to inherit. You could come up with a bunch of hypothetical situations where a college education might not be appropriate, a traditional liberal education, or even a really advanced college education. And this, of course, this does indirectly tie to that second piece of the prompt where I tell you have to say, you need to consider the role you believe a student should play in the creation of value in his or her college experience, right? If a student doesn't see, and a student's family doesn't see value in a college education, right, then maybe that would not be what's good for them. And the student has the right to make that decision and create that life for themselves. Okay, moving along here. So second body paragraph, evidence unit 1. Most students leaving high school are not sure what they want to do with their lives, and often they're not even given sufficient opportunities to examine the universe. Pulled that directly from the Baldwin piece, by the way, and understand their place in it long term, right? This is really talking about this idea of students not knowing exactly what they want to study, and so going directly to a highly technical education or going directly into a single subject, studying a single thing, may not be good for many students, especially American students who get such a broad-based education in public schools. And then for evidence unit 2, you might then bring in one of these authors, Zachariah Derezowitz or Delbanco, to support the idea that that students should that college does or should allow for self-exploration, self-discovery. That's it, right? You should really be connecting back to the definition of a liberal education in your introduction here. You then bring in this piece, and this is the second evidence unit of this paragraph, because you can bring in, for most students or for many students, right, a liberal education allows for them to make some discoveries that students leaving high school generally just haven't made yet, right, about themselves, about what they want to do, about their place in the world, about how their identity and interests intersect with the things in the world that can make them money. And then third body paragraph. This would be sort of where you get to hedge your claims and you get to synthesize these ideas that you present in the first paragraph and the second paragraph, right? So self-exploration and self-discovery should, of course, come to an end, right? Liberal arts colleges generally require one to declare a major by the end of their sophomore year. And that, if it's truly just do whatever you want, explore whatever you want, like no majors or whatever, no focus on the future, no focus on economic success, that could be detrimental as well. And so there is a chart on page 183 that organizes incomes based on subjects, based on professions that might help you make this argument, right? Now, if it so happens that if you really want to bring in more evidence here that it's really important that someone specialize and that someone consider their economic future while still getting a liberal education, you might separate this out and have it be an entire paragraph by itself. And then, right, so if it's true, you can then do this logical move here, where if it's true that Most students don't really quite know what they want to do after high school, and college gives them that opportunity to do that exploration. But exploration comes to an end, right? And needs to come to an end for success, right? How can a college experience blend those two ideas, right? And like what would an ideal blend of liberal education and technical education look like? You might start with that idea I just mentioned about like having to declare a major. There might be, some random idea I'm just thinking of. Maybe a one class a student takes at a liberal arts college in their senior year, or two classes might tie somehow more directly to a career. So just so they sort of know how to enter the workforce once they've finished their degree. That would be just some idea I just came up with that you might integrate if you like, using your own language. And then, of course, conclusion. This conclusion here, actually, this prompt just lends itself well to an interesting conclusion. So you could conclude using this idea of the liberal arts that people talk about today, which is that someone who has a really technical education, an engineer or a doctor, but who is also really familiar with history and literature, might or should be or is likely to be a better engineer or doctor. That's really an idea behind liberal arts education in the 21st century, right? An engineer or doctor who got just that instruction from age 18, right, might be less empathetic or less professionally engaged or less in tune with the actual needs of individuals or society than someone who got this really big, broad-based liberal education with literature and history and sociology and psychology and all of these things, in addition to their specialized training in their field. And so when I say professionally engaged, by the way, I mean like, presenting at conferences, publishing in the field, going to speaking at events with other people in their profession, like being involved in the professional community of that group, whether it's engineer or doctor or some other technical field. And of course, if you don't want to do that, you could, of course, just conclude with a strategy presented in that argument conclusions activity in the blue folder in Schoology that you've been using for argument and synthesis, right? That'll be a little less interesting, but ultimately the conclusion is the piece of your essay I'm looking at the least closely. So if you have a conclusion that concludes your essay, like at an acceptable level, I'm not going to be grading you down for a conclusion that is acceptable, but maybe not necessarily up in the effective category. Please focus more on your argument than on the quality of your conclusion. Alrighty, one thing I didn't really mention here going through this particular example is how to build in that in these body paragraphs anyway, how to build in this idea that, right, that a student needs to be responsible for the construction of their own education, right? And you could bring that in a number of places, right? You should bring in that when we're talking about self-exploration and self-discovery and citing Zachariah, de Rezowitz, or Del Blanco, you could really bring in the idea that a student can make like the student should be the one making the decisions about what things they want to explore and what things they want to discover and how much they want to engage in that. Or you could bring it in down here in this third body paragraph, where a student should be aware of and should be actively making the decision about when to sort of slow down the self-exploration and self-discovery and start to ramp up the thinking around a future career that will set them up for economic success. So there are places you can build that idea in, but it's just really important to me that you bring in that key idea from the text you read, that ultimately a college experience is what a student makes of it. It's not necessarily where they go or what they study, but what a student is seeking out of college and how they go about trying to get get the thing they want out of college for their self-development and also for their future economic success. Alrighty, so that is the approach you might take to writing this paper. Goodbye.